All of our files are free and will remain free. If you like the show, you can show support by donating $1 to help with expenses. Just use the PayPal link on our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page. Thanks.
And welcome back to part 2 of this spectacular expose, I would say, of the huge corruption, conspiracy. That was where we were at, actually. So there actually is a conspiracy. Sure. They say the conspiracy is that the critics are aligned with the oil companies. But what is the real conspiracy?
Well, the real conspiracy is that global warming due to humans has been created and deliberately promoted for political control.
And remember, people, conspiracy theory, the derogatory word that CIA introduced actually back in the JFK days to get people away from.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Being skeptical to the Warren report, quite successfully, I must say. And, everybody knows this now because it's been revealed officially. But nonetheless, even if it wasn't a derogatory word, remember that a conspiracy has to be a theory or a hypothesis, because once it's known, it's not really a conspiracy theory anymore. It's just valid as long as it's something secret. So you're kind of doomed to... it's a lose-lose thing if you start talking about conspiracy. You get brand marked as a kook, but on the other hand, you don't have any other alternative. Because unless you can expose the whole thing, right, then it becomes a conspiracy fact.
Yeah.
And this is actually getting a conspiracy fact, isn't it? It's not a theory anymore.
No, and to put it in context, there's a form of argument called reductio ad absurdum that is reducing to the absurd. So if we take the current definition of conspirator or conspiracy theory, you would say at the time that Galileo was a conspiracy theorist, right? It's just a matter of challenging somebody that challenges the prevailing wisdom and shows that it's incorrect.
Yep.
And of course, as you said, they've got to be marginalized by the power elite.
So the corruption then is every huge state institution is a part of it. The over-national institutions like UN has been hijacked on this area. Does it go into private industry too? Yes,
except that private industry, where they went wrong, as far as I'm concerned anyway, was that they started to become, they tried to use environmentalism for a PR thing. And in fact, they've become more effective at pushing the global warming issue than the global warming alarmists. But business is about profit. And the minute they start saying, no, we're not about profit, we're selling you organic food because we care about you and the environment, rubbish. You're selling it because you can charge 4 times more than regular food for it. And if you were losing money on it, you'd be out of business. So don't insult my intelligence with those arguments. And one of the things that happened with this whole global warming thing, I went around to the oil companies in my early involvement with it and said, look, the CO2 that you're going to be attacked about is scientific rubbish. And they brought their scientists in. They said, oh, yeah, you're right. But then what did they do? They said, no, we're going to try and appease the environmentalists. So they started funding Greenpeace and Sierra Club and so on. Now they're being attacked by those groups. And of course, I just laugh at them and say, hey, you got what you deserved because you didn't stick to the facts. You tried to play the political game for a marketplace advantage. So to hell with you.
Okay, let's examine the political aspect here. I think there's an incentive on both the left and the right to be both against and for it. I'll tell something to the leftists that can motivate them, and that is that if we are not careful, if we do not stop this thing, it will become like a way to tax the poor. In fact, it's happened already.
Yeah.
I heard about many of these green taxes. They don't even go to the people who collect them. Second of all, they're not even donated or used to do anything about the environment. It's just a symbolic tax. And when you start mandatory taxing from this, who's going to be struck? It's the poor. The rich don't care. They can pay, fines, whatever. That's why you can't have a flat tax on tickets, for instance. That just means that if you're poor, you'll be crushed if you do this thing. If you're rich, you kind of just pay your right to do this thing.
Right.
And so it's a class perspective here that the left is completely missing.
Yeah.
And another perspective that should scare them is that there was some revelation about Greenpeace. One of the guys who actually founded Greenpeace, he's jumped off and he says, hey, they are using this CO2 hysteria to destroy environmentalist organizations, because when it inevitably in the future is exposed to be a huge lie, and maybe that it made more harm than good, actually, then who will look like the guilty fellows with eggs on their face? Primarily the hysterical environmentalist companies, not the big players in the shadows who's pulling the threads.
Yeah, the person you're talking about, of course, is Patrick Moore, who was the co-founder of Greenpeace. And I've known Patrick for 30 years or more. And he told me a long time ago that, and the original idea of Greenpeace was like the idea of environmentalism. It was a very, very good idea. And in the early days, you could probably remember this yourself, saying some of the things they did, hey, good for you. But then other things they did, you start to say, no, hold on a minute. And gradually, but what happened, as Patrick told me, he said, after 4 years, the Marxists moved into the Greenpeace organization, and he said, I fought it for 3 years, but by the 8th year, I realized I'd lost complete control, and it was being used for their political agenda. And he said, I got out of it. And of course, he's been attacked. He told me one day he went home and here was a whole huge pile of manure on his front yard, and dumped by the Greenpeace people. And but this is the talent of Patrick. He turned it to his advantage because he called the media and said, "Oh look, some kind people have given me some nice fertilizer for my garden." And he started spreading it around.
I bet he could apply it.
Oh yeah.
But the big picture here is that today I had to reevaluate who I was supporting, because I realized the two I support now are the only two who actually works with real environmentalist issues. All the others are so distracted by the global warming thing that most of their work and resources that could otherwise go to useful stuff, like say a factory is putting out shit in the water that children drinks. Yeah. That's something they should be concerned about, not chasing these CO2 ghosts.
Yeah.
But so they're ruining them today, and they're ruining their future reputation, is my point.
Well, yeah, exactly the point. And you mentioned earlier the trillions of dollars that they've wasted on this that could have been spent on solving other problems. But there's a bigger issue with this, and that is that as the public start to learn the extent to which they've been lied to and deceived, they will start to say, hey, we don't believe anything you tell us. Yeah. Now, this is the classic story, the Aesop story about the boy that cried wolf.
Yes, exactly.
And when the wolf finally did show up, the villagers weren't listening to him anymore. And this is what I'm concerned about. So I've already switched my attention. In fact, I started it 10 years ago. And just to illustrate that idea, in the early days when I questioned the global warming, of course, I got attacked, and people would say, media interview me, and audiences would get up and say, you're giving comfort to the polluters. And I tell you, that bothered me for a long time. Because that wasn't my intent. But then I finally realized that if you tell lies, that in the long term is giving more comfort to the polluters, because the polluters can turn around and say, hey, they lied to you. So I can keep doing what I'm doing.
I bet they're just waiting till this is exposed to say that. See?
Well, yeah, probably.
because
as
I just
said,
read about that huge of the funding that goes into this, let's call it a conspiracy, comes from none other than oil companies.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Why? And the narrative, of course, is that oil companies are funding you. Have you gotten your paycheck yet?
Yeah. Well, no, I haven't received a nickel. But as I said, I did try to get money from them 30 years ago.
Oh.
But they chose to appease the environmentalists.
So it's just appeasing. Then they could be neutral, but now they're financing it. Why would they do that?
But they've been doing that from the start.
Wow.
They've been giving money to Greenpeace.
Obviously, there's something into it for them. They're not doing it from the bottom of their heart.
They thought that by paying them, that they could silence them. But
like
of course,
the tobacco industry
yes,
thing. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And by the way, that tobacco thing, you know where that started? Fred Singer, who was one of the earliest battlers on this whole global warming deception. Fred is now 92 and a very good friend of mine. And Fred, who doesn't smoke, has never smoked, was asked, he's an atmospheric chemist, so he knew about CO2 and the constituency of the atmosphere. And he was asked to do a research on on secondhand smoke. There was a research done showing that secondhand smoke was causing cancer. Fred looked at the research and said, secondhand smoke does cause cancer, but this piece of research is terrible research. It is not good enough to support that argument. They then, since then, have turned to use this and said, oh, yeah, no, these global warming people are like the anti-tobacco people. So that was all orchestrated as well. And that's where that whole story started. And they still use it. Gore still uses it. Oh, yeah, these are the same people that told you that smoking was no problem. Nobody ever said that. And Fred Singer definitely never said that. But that's how it's been used. See, this is the cleverness of these people. It's like with psychopaths. They are extremely charming and clever. And it's not until they stick the knife in your throat that you find out what you're doing.
You see their true nature, yeah. So the means of how they're controlling science today is through media.
Yep.
They make sure that, first off, they make sure what's politically correct to think so that they don't even have to control media. It's just that the editors and the owners make sure that what's being written is in line with this. They can't afford being, different or whatever. So that's one control mechanism. Yep. Then you have the funds and the grants. That's obvious. So eventually that will take care of the new scientists too. And then you have, like you said, they're smearing those who are criticizing and they're booting them. So I think the most important institution to control is the media and who's giving out grants. And who's deciding who's going to be editors and publishers of scientific work. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, that in a limited way, that's correct. But by far the largest group that are controlling the whole thing, and this was also orchestrated, and that is the bureaucrats.
Right.
Maurice Strong deliberately set up the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change through the World Meteorological Organization, which is made up of the bureaucrats from every national weather office.
Okay, so state bureaucrats or scientific bureaucrats?
Both.
Okay.
Both. And think about it. I mean, just to give you the example that I had in my personal example, and I know it resonates with all the others, but there was a fellow at Environment Canada, and by the way, the person that chaired the founding meeting of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was a scientist by the name of Gordon McBean. And after he chaired that founding meeting, he became an assistant deputy minister. That's the second highest level of bureaucrat in Environment Canada, the government weather agency. And of course, then pursued it because you see, Strong knew if you controlled the bureaucrats, you controlled the politicians, particularly with a scientific issue. Now, Henry Hengeveld, who, by the way, literally made a career out of CO2. He published a monthly bulletin called the CO2 Digest as a bureaucrat. And here's the problem. I told Henry, I said, Henry, you people have spent a lot of time convincing the politicians that global warming is due to human CO2, and you finally convinced them. And you think that's a victory. But what you convince them of is an untested, unproven theory. And as Richard Lindzen said about the global warming theory, the consensus was reached before the research had even begun. And I said, what's going to happen is gradually the evidence will come out and show you are wrong. But then what are you going to do as a bureaucratic scientist? Are you going to go to those politicians and say, hey, that theory I told you that you both based your whole political career on is wrong? It isn't going to happen.
You know what? I disagree. I think they can get away with it because you see that even politicians get away. Let's say, take the Iraq War. Those people in England and America who said that this is the right thing to do, they have mass destruction, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be so fine. We're going to get on top of this. They were wrong, but they got promoted and rewarded. Those who were critical, those who said what would happen, and were right, they got all booted and censored in politics, in media, all over the place.
Yep.
And so if you first have managed to destroy science as a fact-checking thing, as the method, then it doesn't matter. Then one ideology can be toppled by another. It's no longer, now it's been a Game of Thrones.
Okay, all right. But let me here's the thing. My point is I'm telling you that it is guaranteed to corrupt the science to have a bureaucrat who's a scientist. It is absolutely guaranteed that they will.
How come?
Well, because they'll get fired if they tell the politician what they don't want to hear. Let me give you another example. There was the complaint about the American coal burning plants in the Midwest were producing acid rain in Quebec and killing the maple sugar industry. You got the same thing in Scandinavia where Maggie Thatcher, and they said, the coal from Britain was causing acid rain that was killing the forests in Europe, the Black Forest and all the rest of it. Okay. I was chair of a committee on climate change, a Canadian committee on climate change, and I was in Ottawa for a hearing where we were trying to reconstruct climates of the past and understand what was going on. A bureaucrat came up to me and he said, I've got a problem. And I said, well, what's your problem? And he said, no, I won't talk about it here. I said, but this is the Museum of Canada. No, he said, the walls have ears in this town.
Wow.
We met at the airport. This is the level of paranoia that you've got.
Yeah, cloak and dagger, huh?
Yeah. And so we met at the airport, Ottawa airport. What was his problem? He was told by his boss in the bureaucracy to get the evidence that American coal was causing and the acid rain that was killing the maple sugar industry in Quebec. While he was doing his research, the Prime Minister of Canada is going around the world saying this is what's happening. The problem was his research didn't show that was the cause. The cause of the decline in the sugar industry in Quebec was, one, because they were getting very early warm, causing the trees to start to grow, and then a hard frost that forced the tree, killed off the tree leaf growth, but the tree will always recover. They have a catch-up factor, but the tree will recover by producing smaller leaves, therefore less sap. That caused a decline in the yields. That was one of the factors. The other factor was that they were experiencing drought. Both of those factors combined were causing the decline in the maple sugar yields. But here was this guy saying, I've done 2 years of research. I've got my evidence. What do I do? And he didn't. What does he do? He goes to his boss, and his boss says, hey, you're fired. This is not what I want to hear.
No.
Right? And so I said to him, the answer is obvious. And he said, what do you mean? I said, you did your research. You must retain your integrity as a scientist. But you're being asked to make a political decision. You're not at that pay scale. You do your work, you give it to your boss, and your boss or somebody above him will decide this is political dynamite. I won't let this go any further.
This can only be revealed if the new ideology seizes power, like we could have said is happening in America now, because Trump is not on board with this.
Trump. Okay, but why isn't Trump on board?
Well, I think if it was true, he wouldn't be on board because it threatens economical interests. He is business friendly, so he wants the regulation away. I don't think he understands this issue at all, but I think he has the political, the economical incentives.
I've got a full disclosure.
Yep.
I was invited to Washington a year ago, last November, to participate in a panel organized and directed by Trump to investigate what regulations at the Environmental Protection Agency needed to be changed, what needed to be done about the false science of global warming. And this was organized.
Yeah, but he didn't personally. Who's behind that incentive, right? It wasn't Trump personally, was it?
Yes. Yes, he directed Myron Ebell. In fact, he got Myron Ebell, who was the head of the Competitive Enterprise Institute in Washington, and I knew Myron for 30 years because I made a presentation at the Competitive Enterprise 30 years ago in the same time that I presented before Congress. And Myron Ebell was appointed to by Trump and directly from him through his administration. Now, Myron and Trump never directly talked. I'll grant you that.
So he's not Trump's advisor?
Not directly.
No, okay.
But he was hired as the advisor to the Trump group. Okay? And Trump, and by the way, he asked the question that I asked. I said, when did you get appointed? He said, in October. I said, but Trump wasn't elected till November.
Wow. And
he asked them that, and he said, well, how could this happen? Yeah. And the answer came back, Mr. Trump is a developer, and developers know that if you don't have everything ready to go on day one for the building, it won't get done.
Yeah, but how could he influence the hiring in October? That was the Obama cabinet.
No, he didn't. He didn't hire him. He appointed him.
Yeah, appointed.
Right.
How could he make that happen?
Well, he just said to me, look, you're already looking at this. I want you to prepare for when I get elected. Then
Okay, I think I misunderstood. I thought you said he was appointed during Obama's period.
No, he was asked during the Obama period by Trump to be prepared.
Oh, okay.
So the answer came back, as I said, that Trump isn't a developer. He then asked a question that I would have asked as well. He said, well, why isn't Trump dealing with the accountability issue of what Hillary did and all the rest of it? You know what the answer he got there was? When you're a developer, you don't have the roofers on the site on the first day. In other words, what Trump was doing things in an order that would be successful.
Okay.
And anyway, Myron was still organizing all of this when Scott Pruitt got appointed. That's why Scott Pruitt got attacked so much and ended up having to resign.
Yeah, just recently.
Yeah, because all of the information, but because Pruitt took the axe to the APA right away. He knew exactly what he had to do. Now, how did Pruitt know so much? Well, Pruitt was the Attorney General of the state of Oklahoma. And the senator for the state of Oklahoma is a Senator James Inhofe, who was the only senator who fought against and dug out all the information about what was wrong with the global warming issue. And he hired a guy by the name of Mark Morano as his research assistant. And between them, they produced a United States Senate minority report on what is wrong with the global warming science. And you could Google that.
But unfortunately, it's been politicized, as you're indicating here. And in America, it's like if you're on the Democrat side, you have to believe in it. And if you're on the Republican side, you have to be against it. But it's not like that in Europe. We mentioned Corbyn, for instance. One would think, oh, Jeremy Corbyn's brother is like opposite. No. He's fully supportive of a progressive government. But it's not the liberalists. It's not the corporate Democrats or laborers. The Blair.
Blair, yeah.
Not Blair. people. His new name is Blair.
Yeah.
So it's not his faction. It's the people on the bottom kind of faction. So I just want to put that out that you don't have to be left or right to have a view on this. This transcends politics. It's about facts and not facts.
Oh, no, I couldn't agree with you more. But the number of people that won't say anything because they get branded, like the scientists that I mentioned to you earlier.
And there's many leftist scientists, so that explains
right,
also.
Leftist,
yeah.
And by the way, an awful lot of politicians.
Yeah.
And I've had many of them admit to me that we agree with you, but we're socialist. Or
like Jeremy, I don't think he talks very loud about this issue, but I'm pretty sure that when he takes over, after a while, he'll start rolling back these things, because you don't really have to. It's like you said, they put up these many signatures. I don't want us to fight back with putting up the opposite. I want us to fight back with changing the system. Yeah. So all government has to do when they come to power is to uncorrupt the central positions that are causing this, and then bam, from there will be unfolding.
Okay, let's get back to the Trump issue, because you see, one of the things that we talked about in that group of about 100 in Washington, of which I was a part, and one of the other scientists there was a fellow by the name of Tony Heller, and Tony is the one that has shown how they've adjusted and corrupted all of the data. He's done more work on that than anybody. Nice. But anyway, one of the things that I pushed strongly was that if Trump was going to stop or slow down at least the climate issue, he couldn't and shouldn't do it on the basis of the science. Right. And the reason that I argued that was that, first of all, few people would understand what he was saying.
True.
And secondly, because he wasn't a scientist himself, he would get tripped up so quickly with the facts and the science and made to look a fool that don't even go there.
Yeah, it's so brilliant. I see what you're saying, because this is classically out from the detective kind of thing. If you want to expose a crime that's done by power people, better you expose the cover-up than the crime itself, because that's where you can get them. It's so brilliant, man.
Exactly. Okay, and so what we said to him, well, look, your platform for running for office was that you are opposed to bad deals. The Paris Climate Agreement is a very bad deal, and here's why. And, of course, the Paris Climate Agreement was simply approving the Green Climate Fund, which was the replacement for the Kyoto Protocol. So it was very simple. And by the way, just to illustrate the point of my argument, Myron and the boys came back and said, but we've got a problem with the bad deal argument. Yes, Trump himself will go with it, but his daughter Ivanka wants him to sign the Paris Climate Agreement. We said, get Trump to show her the Paris Climate Agreement. She is a good enough businesswoman to see it's a bad deal. She immediately changed her mind. And that is when Trump went forward.
That's how that happened. Wow.
Okay, so that was what went on there. So now, of course, you see that Pruitt's gone, but the guy Wheeler that's replaced him, Andrew Wheeler, is actually better informed about the CO2 and the climate and the fossil fuels, because he's the head of the EPA now. And if they try to get rid of him, it'll appear like bullying. But Wheeler, his career before getting this appointment to the EPA he was a lobbyist for the coal industry.
Yeah, that's how they smear them.
Yep.
So it's not clever, I think, to put up someone who seems to have other incentives, because then you can just dismiss them as being motivated by that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They should find someone who's neutral.
Okay, can I use that comment about the Green Climate Fund and the Kyoto Protocol to leap into how all of this evolved and developed?
Yeah, let's take that now.
Okay, well, as I said earlier, in 1968 there was a group started by Rockefellers, and it was called the Club of Rome because the first meeting was held in Rome, and there were a very large group of very influential people there: Ted Turner, Mikhail Gorbachev, and so on, and Morris Strong.
Quite a Bilderberger thing.
Oh, yeah, quite a Bilderberg thing. And they decided, because of reports by Paul Ehrlich, who wrote The Population Bomb and was the first person to put on the world table the idea the world's overpopulated beyond Malthus. And so he convinced the Club of Rome that the world was overpopulated, and they took the Malthusian idea that the world population would outgrow food supply and said the world population would outgrow all resources. And that became the central theme of what they were trying to do. And then they narrowed it, and they said that, yes, everybody in the world is using resources, poor and rich, but the number of people in the world is increasing. Therefore, the demand on the resources will constantly grow. But the industrialized nations are using resources at a much greater rate than the developed nations. And in a book called Cloak of Green by Elaine Dewar, and I love to cite this book because Elaine Dewar was of the old school of investigative journalism, in that she set out to write a book praising Canadian environmentalists. So she had a list of people, David Suzuki, Elizabeth May, the head of our Green Party now, Maurice Strong, and she was going to write a book saying what great people they were, what great work they were doing. But the more she talked to them and the more she investigated, the more she discovered that they were more corrupt than the people that they were attacking. For example, Elizabeth May was working as a lawyer for the Department of Natural Resources of the federal government of Canada, and they were trying to block the building of hydroelectric dams in Saskatchewan, and where she was supposedly working with the government to promote these dams for cheap and safe electricity, she was giving the environmental groups all of the secret documents. And the government, what they did was they didn't fire her. They just said, look, you can resign and we'll just let this all go. She resigned a very, very well-paying bureaucratic job. And of course, she then went and became the head of the Sierra Club. But anyway, one of the people she interviewed for 5 days was Maurice Strong, and she went to the United Nations to talk with him. And he said to her, you know, what do you think's wrong with the planet? And he said, look, the problem for the planet are the industrialized nations, because they're using up all these resources. And isn't it our responsibility to get rid of them? Now, I mentioned this idea earlier, the number of thousands of ideas every day, but the number that actually get put into practice is very, very small. One of Strong's abilities was his ability to organize, to take an idea and make it happen. All right. And I want to at this point, another very, very important thing. All change, everything in the world starts with an idea. Everything. Whether it's a religion, whether it's a product, whether it's a country. America started with an idea. Everything starts with an idea. But what happens is, and I've studied this extensively, what happens is that gradually, in order to disseminate or spread the idea, you need a structure. And of course, what happens is that a structure is rigid. But it's rigid in an environment that's changing all the time. And so gradually what happens is the structure becomes more important than the idea. Now, the classic example was the Catholic Church. And before any of your listeners get angry at me, you must distinguish between the Catholic Church as a structure.
Oh, we don't have many Christian sheepish listeners.
No, well, it doesn't matter anyway. I don't care because the point I'm going to make is there's a difference between the Catholic Church, which is a structure, and Christianity, which is an idea.
Exactly.
Right.
And we know that the original Jesus
Yes.
is very different from what Catholic
Right.
Church became.
Exactly. Yeah. And George Bernard Shaw, the great English or Irish playwright, said, Christianity is the greatest thing in the world. It's just a pity nobody ever tried it.
Exactly.
Which is very good. Yeah. But anyway, what happened, of course, is that the church gradually became more important than the religion until Martin Luther said, hey, you've got the rich people being able to buy their way into heaven and the poor people can't. What kind of religion is that? And by the way, what's interesting, and I've written articles about this, there's one on my website about it. If Martin Luther had tried to overthrow the church with the Reformation, even 20 years before he did it, he would have been arrested and executed. Yes. But here's why. In Europe, there was the Hanseatic League, which was a whole economic league that developed around the Baltic.
That's why I speak like this. I can just tell that now. Yes. People wonder, because the Hanseatic League was Germany driven.
Yes.
Where actually my hometown, Bergen, was one of those, not colonies, but one of their, those. Right. I don't know the word for it, but they were more influential than the Norwegian king.
Yes. Well, the Hanseatic League was built around the herring fisheries in the Baltic. Okay,
Hamburg.
But what happened was, and it got to the point where people in the Hanseatic League, the church said, you can buy indulgences for your way into heaven with herring. The herring became a viable currency.
Right.
Okay. Now, what happened was, when was the Hanseatic League operating? Well, around 1500.
Yes. Even
when the world was warm.
Right.
But as the world started to cool down, the temperature started to change.
Let me remind you, folks, Greenland was green once.
Yes.
And the Vikings settled there.
Exactly. And so gradually the water in the Baltic cooled down, the temperature dropped, the salinity decreased because the rainfall increased. And as you guys know, I can't pronounce it properly, but the Kattegat and Skagerrak.
Yep. Kattegat and Skagerrak. Yep.
Okay, that entrance into the Baltic means that the flow of water in and out of the Baltic is very, very limited. Right, and it's getting shallower all the time because the land is rising. You're gonna have to either put a canal through or do something. But anyway, the Baltic Ocean became less saline. In fact, it got to the point where people in what is now St. Petersburg were able to take their drinking water out of the eastern end of the Baltic at that time. The herring, of course, like all fish, are very sensitive to their environment, so they migrate out of the Baltic into the North Sea. That caused the collapse of the herring fisheries and the collapse of the Hanseatic League. And so within a few years, literally a few years, it went from the poor people can't afford to buy their way into heaven, we don't care. The middle class people can't afford to buy their way into heaven. We don't care. The prince can't afford to buy their way into heaven. Now we care. And we'll support Martin Luther that will go and attack those nasty.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. So these things are all linked to that. But anyway.
So the political climate of any day.
Yes.
Obviously needs to be optimal for, whatever to win.
Yes.
So, and today, I think you're right, we're in a transition zone. It's getting easier to be a criticist now.
Well, but there's a reason for that I'll get to in a minute.
Yeah, battles like yours.
But anyway, the Club of Rome decided that that the people were using too much, and because of Maurice Strong's idea that it was the industrialized nations that had to be shut down. But think about that. How do you shut down an industrialized nation?
From within.
Well, but you see, if you cut the fuel prices, if you increase the fuel prices, as you know, the minute the prices go up, people complain. They'll form lines and attack. But so that's politically very difficult to do.
Energy prices has exploded. They never go down. They only go up.
Well, exactly. And so it's political dynamite to cut off the energy flow. But if you could show that those industries, and think about an industrialized nation like a car burning fossil fuels. You can stop the car by cutting off the fuel supply, but you can also stop the engine by plugging the exhaust. So if you could show that the exhaust of the car or the industrialized nation, which is CO2, is causing a global catastrophe, then you've got a reasonable, rational reason for shutting down industry.
I see your point, but I just want to point out anyway that if even that was true, which is it ain't, but if it was, then there's no reason attacking cars, because they've never been the majority of CO2 producers. Well, but what about all the cows, for instance? Factory cows or the airplanes?
The cows was the methane issue, and that occurred before the CO2, because back in the 70s there was a group of people led by a guy by the name of Jeremy Rifkin, and he wrote a book called Beyond Beef, and he actually did a whole PowerPoint presentation around the world that you can Google. It's Jeremy Rifkin, Rifkin, Beyond Beef. And the whole campaign was that the cow was destroying the planet and causing global warming. Okay, and I fought with that. I became a technical advisor to the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, and we started pointing out that methane was only 0.026% of the total greenhouse gases, and an even smaller amount of the total gases in the atmosphere. And I also pointed out that if it's the cow that's the problem, then let's do the whole formula. Yes, the number of cows have increased in America, for example, from about 200,000 120 years ago to 85 million today. Nobody's arguing they haven't increased. But in that same period of time, the number of buffalo have decreased from about 100 million down to about 200,000. So let's put both sides of the formula in play here. And then if you consider the sacred cows in India, where there are 200 million of them that don't even produce any foodstuffs, we can't blame India. That's a developing nation. That's not fair. So, then what about the rice paddies in Asia, which are the largest source of methane from human activity in the world? Oh, no, we can't.
Yeah, but that's food for people, so you can't count that either. Yeah.
Yes, but you see, this is what happens the minute you start to introduce science into the claims that they're making, and so the methane issue quickly went away. The CO2 issue was a different issue, but it was the same theme that we want.
Yeah, but aren't they saying that the factory production of cows is keeping the CO2 exhaust up? There's no correlation there.
No, because just to give you an example of how little we know about this. They discovered about 6 years ago, German scientists, again, you can Google this, they discovered that the rainforests of the world, and they were actually studying the Amazon rainforest, is a major source of methane.
Right.
It's also a major source of CO2. And naturally, because the rainforests in the tropical regions they're very different than all the forests of the rest of the world.
Okay.
Because in Norway, you've got two types of trees. You've got deciduous, which drop their leaves every winter, right? Yep. And you've got the evergreen with the needles that don't drop their leaves.
Yep.
Right? Now, the trees in the tropical rainforest always have leaves.
Yeah.
And nobody ever thinks of that.
They are evergreen.
Right? And how do they function then? What happens is they're sitting on the most infertile soil in the world. Why is it that way? Because the amount of heat and rainfall washes all the minerals out of the soil. What's left is virtually mostly iron. That's why the tropical soils are so red. They're called laterites, which it implies the iron origin of them. In the rainforest, what happens is the trees grow leaves, drop the leaves immediately start to rot, and that is then taken up by the tree again. You clear one section of the tropical rainforest, and it doesn't recover. The soil bakes iron hard.
Yeah, but they're reducing it record amounts these days.
Not true. Not true.
Oh.
Do you know where that figure came from?
No.
That figure came from the accountants at the World Bank, because one year they were asked to do a budget of how much money do we need to tackle deforestation in the tropical rainforest. And so they went to the scientists and said,
yeah, but I've seen footage of how they cut down and expand.
Oh, yes.
So that's all propaganda.
Of course.
So the good news is that rainforest is in good shape?
Yes.
So the rainforest...
Yes, it's like here in British Columbia. I can show you pictures of areas.
What about all those people who looks for minerals and stuff like that? Those companies?
They are just spot, very, very localized impact. And many of them now are going in and replanting after they leave. But to get back to what was happening with the World Bank, these accountants said to the scientists, how much rainforest is being cut down? They said, we don't know. So the accountants who had to come up with a number assumed that the figure that they used, but it turned out to be 82% above what was actually being cut. But that became the real number that was touted. Again, it was Swedish scientists that dug into this and looked at it. The same thing happened with the amount of the growth of the Sahara Desert. Remember that issue of desertification? And finally...
Yeah, isn't that true either?
Well, no. They went and got the satellite data and started measuring it. And in fact, the Sahara Desert had shrunk, not grown.
Wow.
Okay.
I have to look into this because, I have to verify it. But
there is not a single environmental story that bears investigation. And if you want to look at one book, just one book to save you time, it's called But Is It True?
Excellent title.
The name of the author is Aaron Vidalsky, Wildavsky.
Oh, I'll definitely check that one out.
All right. He was a political science professor in America who had graduate students, and he said, look, we're hearing all about these environmental problems. Let's investigate it. And each student chose a topic, whether it was deforestation, acid rain, whatever it was. And he said, and these were master students, by the way, graduate students. They all went and did their investigation. Every one of them came back and said there was no scientific support for the claims.
Okay. But look, there are real pollutions going on.
Of course.
Like in in America, in USA, they have this drinking water that is killing people. Stuff like that's happening all the time.
But yes, of course there's that. But like in Flint, Michigan.
Yeah.
But what caused that? That was technical error by the people running the place.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's global warming. I'm just saying that there are environmental causes worth fighting for.
Well, but I wouldn't call that environmental. I would call that a local. Yes, you can pick any issue and find somewhere in the world where you can show this as a problem. This is what the media do. I'll give you another example. I was asked by a TV station. They were doing a program on pollution. They said, give us a list of ideas of how we can report this in our TV program. I gave them a list of about 20 different ideas. The producer came back and said, I can't use most of these. And I said, why not? He then confirmed what that great Canadian Marshall McLuhan said. He said, because it doesn't fit the medium. I can't show that on television. And McLuhan's comment was, the medium is the message. And one of the things, how would you show pollution?
The ugly truth of it to get reactions so people wake up and support it. Worst case scenarios, I would show them.
Yeah, but virtually any program, any story, any newspaper, the one picture you see all the time are smokestacks with supposedly pollution coming out of them.
Yeah.
But today, certainly in America, now not in China, I agree there's problems in China, and they dealt with it during the Olympics, and then they've let it go again.
Yeah.
Because they want to grow their economy. That's more important to them. But virtually every smokestack you see in the Western world today, that is steam coming out. It is not pollution.
Oh, it's no smoke, it's steam.
Yes.
Huh.
It's steam because they've got scrubbers on them. This is the problem.
Well, you're preaching to the choir, because I went from smoke to vape. I'm a vapor, and we don't want to be called smokers at all, because there's no fire. No smoke without fire is what they say, right? Yeah. We're dealing with water here, man.
Yeah. And by the way, while we're pursuing this thing, and you can read Vidalski's book for yourself, but one of the biggest stories that triggered the whole environmental movement was Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. Mm-hmm. And that was, I was drawn up short on that issue when I was on a radio program and a fellow phoned in and said, who's killed more people in history than anyone else? And of course, the host and I start guessing Hitler, Stalin, Mao Zedong, and so on. And he kept saying, no. And then he said, in fact, you'll find that most of them didn't kill anybody. They had other people kill people for them. Right.
So who was it then?
Rachel Carson. And do you know why? Because she made up the story, the lie, that DDT is causing thinning bird shells, which was never, ever proven, had nothing to do with raptors. And she did it because she believed her husband had died of cancer caused by him coming in contact with DDT. And so she went on a campaign, and because of her, they got DDT banned. And because DDT has been banned, since it's been banned, at least 120 million people have died in Africa from malaria that didn't need to die from malaria. And what's happened since, by the way, and again, you can check this, at least 17 African leaders have said, to hell with you. We're going to use the DDT to stop the dying of our people.
I mean, in our show, we're all about paradigm expansion. But I have to say, you're really stretching mine to the limit, because I've been force-fed from I was a little chicken that, yes, DDT was one of the errors we did in the past, like quicksilver in the teeth, or like asbestos in the walls. It's looked at as progress that we're not using DDT anymore. Now you come here, 70 years after this became a truism, and you're saying even that is a part of the manufactured consensus. Jeez.
All right, let me quote a Middle Ages chemist. Alchemist. He was called an alchemist because...
I love alchemists. Let's hear it.
Okay, yes. And there were a lot of good ones, but Paracelsus.
Oh, yeah, he was a genius.
Yeah, okay.
His medicine is so effective.
And his comment covers all of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, let's hear it.
The toxicity is in the dosage.
Right.
In other words...
I've heard that before, yes.
Okay.
Anything can be toxic.
Yes, I point out to people, if you eat all the salt that's in the salt table on your table, you die.
That's true.
So are you going to ban salt?
Good point.
In other words, it's not a no-risk world. There's risk to everything, but what we do is we try to calculate the risk and accommodate some and not others. Now, when you come along and say anything can kill you, okay, so what? Oh, then that allows me then to ban or to pick anything I want to stop you using it or doing it.
Okay, I get your point.
Right. You get my point?
Yeah, but I see your DDT and I race you with the following.
Yes.
And now we're going off the deep end, but let's address this question I have to you now. And after that, I want you to tell us about the court case. But let's first go into Looneyland, because one of the big conspiracy theories out there is so-called chemtrails.
Yeah.
Contrails, chemtrails. And, in the beginning when they talked about this, they were saying that, it's because they want to kill off the population. But now, among those who think this is an issue, is that what they're really doing is global dimming. Because they believe in global warming, so they try to spread artificial clouds as much as possible to reflect. Because we know that if there were no ice on the poles, the Earth will be really hot because it reflects most of the sunlight.
Yeah.
So from that thinking, if they can spread aerosol, which we know they do, so if they can cover the globe with that, then they can reflect more sunlight and they can prevent global warming. Now, even if this was true, even if this was the motivation, even if global warming was a reality, even if this was the effect, I would be against it, because you're not going to meddle with a natural ecosystem like that when you don't have all the facts. And then we never had all the facts in anything. Everything is a progression, right? Yep. We learn all the time. So that's what I want to throw out there to you, and now you can run with it in either direction.
Okay. What you're referring to, it comes under the collective of geoengineering.
Yeah.
And of course, if you're a Christian, you can say, well, this is what happens when you get rid of God. You got to play God.
Yeah,
and you find out. I tried it at home. It's a very difficult job. Back when I started studying climate, global cooling was the consensus, and there were all sorts of crazy schemes.
Yeah, because I heard we were going towards an ice age. Is that true?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, yes, because the global temperature, which, by the way, increased more between 1900 and 1940 than it did in the 1990s. Yeah. But from 1940 to 1980, global temperatures were going down. And so, of course, they were doing simple linear trends, and they said, oh, it's going down, it's going to keep on going down. So you had all of this harem-scarum things going on about global...
But then we learn more about sunspots.
Well, we've known about the sunspots. The Chinese have known about them for a very long time.
Yeah.
But we knew that the temperature of the Earth correlated with sunspot numbers. Basically, the warmer the Earth, the more sunspot numbers. The cooler the Earth, the less sunspot numbers.
And this has to do with cycles, right?
Well, the problem was it was a correlation. We didn't know the mechanism.
Yeah, right.
And this is another of the deceptions of the IPCC. A fellow by the name of Henrik Svensmark found the explanation, and we had known for a long time, for example, that there's more cloud in the atmosphere than there are aerosols or condensation nuclei to form those clouds. Okay. That's why cloud seeding works. You add particles into the cloud so that more water vapor as a gas condenses into water droplets to form more raindrops.
But that's not chemtrails, because you can see with your own eyes that what comes out of the planes become these new type of clouds that I can't even remember from my childhood.
They were using silver iodide. What's wrong with it is that you don't know how much you can't determine how effective it was, because you don't know how much it would have rained if you hadn't seeded the cloud. So you've got no starting point. But so say this whole geoengineering ideas. One of them was, by the way, was to build a dam across the Bering Straits because
I remember.
Yeah. The Soviets were saying it was so cold. If we build a dam across there, we stop the cold water coming out of the Bering Sea and cooling off the North Pacific, which would then warm the whole middle latitudes and warm us up.
Wouldn't you say that the Suez Channel plus the channel down in between North and South America, ain't both those really geoengineering?
And anything that you do is geoengineering, and anything you do is going to have an effect.
Yeah.
One of the effects of the canals, particularly the Suez, is that there's been an interchange of species through the canal between that actually I think is the bigger issue. The only other time it becomes an issue is if you're starting to divert large amounts of fresh water off the land into the oceans. And that's one of the things that's happened in the Soviet Union when they were diverting major rivers from the south to the north. And so they connected, I've forgotten the names of the rivers, but the Volga, the Ob.
Right. Yeah, that's huge geoengineering, man.
Yes. And
then you have these global dams, these huge dams.
Yeah. Well, they were doing it in the Soviet Union primarily because they wanted to be able to take submarines from the Black Sea up to the up to their major submarines.
The military concerns were governing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the same thing in America. The whole interstate system in America was built as a defensive mechanism for the military to be able to get around very quickly to all parts of the U.S.
Right.
And so the whole idea of geoengineering, they were even talking in the cool period of putting up huge, great reflectors in space to direct heat into northern cities.
Exactly. So that makes sense then about these artificial clouds, that it's kind of the same idea going on. What do you think? Because I know they deny that it has happened deliberately, but now they are openly discussing doing it. Well, what people have accused them of doing already.
Well, yeah, there's several problems with it. First of all, there were other high-altitude research going on in which they were experimenting with the F layer in the ionosphere. And that was all about communication around the globe, which was going on before you had satellites, which gave you coverage. I mean, if you think about the Soviet Union, for example, it's the largest country in the world with probably most of the coastline of no use to it at all. It really is a trapped nation, which is ironic for it being the biggest.
They have two coastlines, Turkey and Norway.
Yeah. And of course that's been the center of their attention. Now you've got Vladivostok, but it's so far removed.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's get back to the climate issue
thing.
Yeah. So Elaine Dewar. Well, I'll just finish the thing about the chemtrails thing.
Yeah.
So the government said, hey, yeah, we're getting all these complaints about global warming and we're telling people it's a problem. So we better be doing something to try and limit it or control it. So they started the spraying of aerosols, which, of course, then became the chemtrail issue and so on.
And now they're talking about global dimming.
Sun dimming and so on. But here's the problem with all of that. Most of what got reported as chemtrails were in fact contrails, condensation trails from high-flying jets. Because while all of this was going on, they developed jet engines that operated more efficiently in the stratosphere than in the troposphere.
That's why it's new.
Yes.
Because those clouds are goddamn artificial, man.
Oh, yeah. Well, but if you
I can't remember them from when I was a child.
Think about there are clouds that form in the stratosphere. They're called noctilucent clouds because they're ice crystals that are only visible as a night light when the sun is very low and it reflects off them. We've known about them for a long time, but they have increased in number. I suspect it's because the water vapor from the jet exhausts is creating more of them. And so the increase in noctilucent clouds and reported chemtrails is as much about these high-flying jets. And where you see the greatest increase in the reports of chemtrails is over northwestern America. And the greatest increase in high-altitude traffic has been between America and Asia. The number of flights every single day is absolutely amazing.
That's a pretty strong correlation.
Yeah. So, but now back to Svensmark. Svensmark, and what we were talking about was the correlation between sunspot numbers and global temperature. We knew there was a correlation, but it was just that, a correlation. Svensmark were working on, I forgot, Christensen and Larson. I've forgotten the names exactly, but Christensen was one of them. They published a paper in 1995 showing that the length of day varied with the variation in the sun's magnetic field. And Svensmark then picked up on this, and he created a theory called the cosmic theory. What he showed was that the sunspots varied in number with changes in the sun's magnetic field. And as the strength of the sun's magnetic field changed, it changed the amount of cosmic radiation from deep space reaching the Earth. As that cosmic radiation reaches our atmosphere, it penetrates into the lower atmosphere and creates condensation nuclei that creates cloud. So this was a cause of cloud cover in the lower atmosphere that we did not know existed until Svensmark showed its existence in 2000. He had to have confirmation of that, and one of the things he needed research done at the CERN laboratory in Geneva to show that if you brought cosmic radiation from space into the Earth's atmosphere, it would create these nuclei. Well, the CERN lab did the research, and they withheld the research. And the head of the research lab at CERN said that he was ordered not to release it. And this is another of the corruptions that went on. And you can check with Svensmark about this yourself.
Okay.
And he eventually they showed, if you look at the plot of a low-level cloud against cosmic radiation, it's almost a 98% fit. And of course, if you've got a greenhouse and you put a screen up, or if you got an Earth and you put cloud up, that's going to control your temperature. That's why the relationship between sunspot numbers and global temperatures occurs. So the cause and effect has been explained for the correlation, but none of that is included in any of the IPCC research, and only in the most recent report do they even mention that it is there. They don't include it in any of their computer models.
Now, I heard they were purging any solar science from the UN scientific research. But are you saying that, are they deliberately spreading more clouds? Do you think they are?
Well, what I'm saying is that the American government was, for a period of time, experimenting with using aerosols to reduce global warming.
Yeah, so they did do that. Because they're discussing it openly now if they're going to do it.
Yeah, but you see, this is their problem. You know, the government, they start stories, and then when they create panic, they got to deal with the story. And this is what happened. They were going around, global warming and humans are causing it, and then you know what?
So I'm looking at it as a whitewash. I'm thinking that they're discussing if they're going to do it now because they're going to end up doing it, and then they don't have to explain that they have done it already.
But think about the contradiction, Al. This is the problem with people, and I've experimented with this. You in 1 minute you'll get somebody saying there's too much government. We got to reduce government. There's too much taxes. 30 minutes later, the same person is saying, here's a problem here. Why doesn't the government do something about it? And they don't even think about the contradictions in those statements. And of course, that's what the government are constantly trying to deal with. They're creating problems in order to have control, but then that creates a reaction which they then have to deal with.
Yeah. So they're putting out their own fires all over the place.
Yeah. And so they're chasing their tail. Exactly.
Okay, so this change in fuel, which is a very good point. Was that just natural development, or was there an intention there, do you think, that they wanted an extra effect, like never let a good opportunity go to waste? Let's piggyback on the fact that we're already sending them out there. Let's now put something in the fuel that creates a certain effect. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
A more sinister.
Yeah, I think it was the present mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, who said, never let a good crisis go to waste.
Crisis go to waste.
And so, I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Okay.
But you have to piggyback onto that, this whole larger scheme of the Club of Rome.
Yeah.
And the but anyway.
Yeah, did you complete that storyline?
Let me finish that idea. Yeah, well, Elaine Dewar, in her book, when Maurice Strong said to her, we got to get rid of the industrialized nations, she said, well, why don't you run for politics? And he said, you can't do anything as a politician, which is probably the only honest statement he ever made.
Yeah.
But then she said, well, what are you going to do? And he said, I'm going to go to the United Nations because I can raise all the money I want from whomever I want, appoint anyone I want, and control the agenda. That's why he set up the United Nations Environment Program. And and by the way, this is a very important idea that's part of this. I used to think that commissions of inquiry were a good idea because you could say, finally, we're getting the politics out of the issue. Let's have an independent, apolitical group look at the issue.
Yeah.
What I discovered on the appointment to my first commission of inquiry, which was about conflict on a lake in Manitoba, Canada, was that commissions of inquiry are the perfect vehicle of control for the politician.
Right. And you discover this from the inside.
Yes. And why is that? Well, because, first of all, they can then ignore, the politicians can ignore any questions from the media by saying, I can't comment till the commission reports. Mm-hmm. Secondly, they go back to their offices and with the bureaucrats determine what the commission can look at. And so with this water thing that I was charged to look at, the terms of reference were so limited that we couldn't even get the data we needed. In other words, they were predetermining the results of the commission by controlling the terms of reference. And what I did was I went to the chairman of the commission and said, you go tell the politician, either we get access to everything or I'm going to tell the media that you're trying to predetermine the outcome. Once we got all the information, we discovered that there had been 3 previous commissions, one 100 years old, that identified all the problems and all the solutions, and none of them had been dealt with. Not one of them. And when you look at conspiracy theories, you've already talked about, one of the things with the internet, it is that people are saying, oh, it's triggering all these conspiracy theories. Why? Because people have access to information that even a lot of governments didn't have access to before. And they're starting to realize that there are a whole lot of stuff that the governments, through these commissions of inquiry, have not been telling them. And I'll give you the classic one. I was watching television one day, and Chief Justice Warren, who was put in charge of the commission of the Kennedy assassination, was interviewed. And they said to him, why didn't you look at the mafia connection in Dallas with Jack Ruby and the killing of Oswald? And the justice said very calmly, it wasn't in my terms of reference. I knew exactly what he was saying, but most of the audience had no idea what he was saying. But what's turned out to be one of the largest conspiracy theories on the internet today is who killed Kennedy. Yeah. And so this is what's going on here, is that people are starting, they have access.
Yeah, then you have to demonize the source, which is the internet.
Yes, exactly. Now, I'll finish up with the Doer thing, but I want to raise another point with you. After 5 days with Maurice Strong at the UN, Doer concluded Strong was using the UN as a platform to sell a global environment crisis and the global governance agenda. Okay? So what Strong did was he set up the United Nations Environment Program to organize all of this. He then set up the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was his commission of inquiry, okay? And he then wrote the regulations for that commission of inquiry. He wrote the definition of climate change that was given to them at the Rio conference in 1992. And, of course, what they did was they limited the definition of climate change that IPCC could look at to only human causes of climate change. That means, of course, that you then eliminate the sun, you eliminate all these other factors, and therefore you predetermine the outcome. Yeah. And this was all done deliberately.
Yeah. The thing that made it for me when it comes to the sun, which made me so certain, is the fact that NASA, maybe they did this without thinking, but they released the fact that all the planets in our solar system is currently undergoing climate change. Yeah. Not necessarily global warming, some of them cooling. Yeah. And so when NASA released that research, that was it. Because you cannot think that it's my car who, let's say, melting the poles on Mars, right? Well, so that just shows you has to be a higher cause, which is much more far-reaching than whatever goes on.
When NASA did that for a reason, but it wasn't NASA. About 2015, I've forgotten which year exactly, I was at a conference in Washington on climate, and I was invited to meet with a group for breakfast. And there were about, I think, 8 or 9 of them at the table. The person that asked me to be with the group was Harrison Schmitt. Harrison Schmitt was the last astronaut on the moon. And he had started to look at this climate issue and discovered how corrupt it was. But what this group, and these were all engineers and people associated with NASA, what they were really angry about was that there's an organization called NASA GISS, which is the Goddard Institute of Space Studies.
Right.
Okay. That organization has been the major source of false information for the global warming issue. And it started, and by the way, Harrison Schmitt, and he got 55 other NASA astronauts and people, they wrote a letter to NASA saying, you've got to stop this a misuse of NASA for a false scientific issue. You're giving all the good work we've done a very bad name. Now, what happened was that when the global warming issue came up through the Club of Rome, one of the people that was involved with it was Ted Turner. He was a member of the Club of Rome, but he also
CNN, yeah.
Yeah. Now he also was involved with Senator Timothy Wirth, W-I-R-T-H. Now, Senator Wirth was in the U.S. Senate, and he got brought in with the Club of Rome through Turner to push the whole AGW, that is anthropogenic global warming issue. Wirth arranged for a very, very low down NASA GISS scientist by the name of James Hansen, who, by the way, none of his graduate work was in climate at all, none of it. But he decided that global warming was a good career issue. So when Wirth came to him, he heard about it. Wirth went to him and said, are you prepared to appear on a witness stand in the Senate and say that you're 99% certain that humans are causing climate change? Hansen said yes. Now, let me fill you in on the story on this. And you, again, another Google for you. Google PBS Frontline. PBS Frontline.
Yeah.
And then Wirth, W-I-R-T-H, interview. Because Wirth, in that interview with PBS Frontline, explained how he chose Hansen and how they staged the whole hearing. What he did was they found out what was the hottest day of the year on average in Washington. That's the day they scheduled the hearing for. They went in the night before, opened all the windows, and shut off the air conditioning.
Jeez.
And so here was the hearing about global warming held in this sweltering hearing.
It sounds like a psyops.
Oh.
Because they're thinking as much about the psychology as about the case.
Well, let me take this even further.
Yeah.
Because now, Wirth, by the way, only served one term as a senator. And you've got to serve 2 terms to get pension and everything else. So why on earth would anybody only serve 1 term? The reason Wirth served only 1 term was because Ted Turner gave $1 billion to the United Nations of his own money on condition that the United Nations set up the United Nations Foundation and hire Timothy Wirth as the vice chairman of it. And that's where he is today. Well, of course, this story about what he did in Washington is coming back to haunt him. So he now has come out and said that he lied to PBS, that the whole story he told PBS was a lie.
That doesn't make you look any better. You can't trust the guy for sure.
Of course. And yet this is the guy that was so influential. That Hansen hearing in 1988 was what triggered this whole thing. And so that's how it began. And by the way, beyond Strong giving them the definition of climate change as only human causes, the truth is you cannot possibly identify the human cause or what portion of it is if you don't know how much natural variation there is and what's causing that. Exactly. So it's impossible to do what they were doing. But you see, it allowed them to eliminate most of the variables that were actually causing climate change, like the sun. like water vapor, because water vapor is 95% of the greenhouse gases. It's by far the most important greenhouse gas. But the IPCC say, yes, oh yeah, humans produce a little bit of water vapor, but the amount they produce is insignificant. Therefore, we'll assume that water vapor is constant. We don't have to look at it. But the truth is, water vapor varies enormously from year to year, and even a 2% variation will give you more climate change than all of the CO2 impact combined.
Yeah, what about the volcanoes?
Well, the volcano is another of the myths.
Okay.
Volcanoes erupt. There's about 10,000 of them active. Yes, they affect climate, but mostly by putting particles of dust into the atmosphere where they block the sunlight, another dimming effect.
Yeah.
The volcanoes only affect the climate for about 9 years is detectable in the record. And I know a lot about this because we did a world conference on Tambora, the biggest eruption in the last few thousand years. But the dust falls out of the atmosphere very quickly. Only volcanoes that erupt at the equator, erupt vertically, and put that dust into the stratosphere actually affect the global climate. The CO2 from volcanoes, from the cone, that is the crater, is a very small amount of the total amount in the atmosphere. But what you're not being told is that CO2 is leaking out of the earth for thousands of kilometers around a volcano. And they've shown that studies done with Mount Etna and the Hawaiian volcanoes, for example. You can get readings of 6,000 parts per million above ground level all around the Mauna Loa volcano. So what do? They put a CO2 detector right on the volcano.
Yeah, right. I've heard about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's just ludicrous. Okay.
And manipulate the data.
Yeah.
But if we have, let's say we have established a case of criminality here, we always have to go to the motives. And my first wonder here is, if the Club of Rome is set up by the oil people, Rockefeller and stuff, why would they let the oligarchs associated with it then create an ideology that, for all intents and purposes, would hurt, especially their industry, oil and coal?
Well, it doesn't hurt them. And this is another of the great myths. The oligarchs and the wealthy people benefit from war.
Yeah.
If you look at the Rothschilds, where they were financing both sides of the Napoleonic Wars.
Yeah, this is a historic fact.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. And so, no, that's simply not the case. And of course, what you also see is who are the people that are pushing one world government. George Soros is a perfect example. And of course, Ted Turner is another example. Why these multi-billionaires get involved into this? They think they're saving the planet, or I don't know what the motive is.
Oh, okay. So they may actually be led astray themselves.
I'm not sure whether it's led astray or whether there's some sort of inner, I want to do something that's significant. I want to leave a mark. I want to make my name for myself.
Yeah, because even if we can't pretend to be in other people's heads, we have to ask the question, because the general public, the first thing they ask when they start realize something is fishy here is why. Why would they do it?
Yeah, I think the simple answer is control, power. I think that's what it's all about. And if you could, this is why they chose the global warming, because you see, one of the things, and this leads me around to that other point I wanted to get to, the more the issue affects everybody, the more you can argue for a global governance, as Strong was doing, but you can also transcend nationalism. And of course, that is what
handy for globalists, huh?
Globalists, exactly.
Like TPP and all that stuff.
Yes, exactly. Now,
no accountability.
Yeah, I want to introduce another whole idea to you, because this is very much a part of it. And this was part of a presentation I made in Phoenix, Arizona a year ago. The American Revolution, and Obama ran around the world talking about American exceptionalism and telling people that it was the claim that Americans believed they were superior to everybody else. That's not what it's about at all. It's about the fact that the American political system is unique. And a lot of people make the mistake of saying America is a democracy.
No.
It isn't.
It's a republic.
It's a republic, exactly. And therefore, a republic is always answerable to the people and the individual. And one of the things that American
except if you corrupt the law.
But that's why this control and this Supreme Court thing that's going on now is so critical to it all. You see Poland right now, where they're trying to Poland's trying to control the judiciary, and it's a fatal mistake. You must have a completely independent judiciary, and the founding fathers knew that. But you see, what's happened around the world and what's going on in America as part of it is the final phase of the American Revolution was they got free speech, which no other country has. And I would never have been charged with my crimes in America.
Yeah, you have to tell us that before you leave, too.
Yeah, okay, I will.
The court case.
And then they got the private ownership of land. I mean, Canadians think they own the land they live on. They don't. It's called Crown land, and the government, under the law, can take it back at any time they want. You go to Britain, where 1/3 of England is controlled by 5 people, and 2 of them are the Queen and Prince Philip or Prince Charles.
If they wanted to, they could take over any time. It's not like in Norway. It's different. In Norway, the royalty, the monarchy, is actually accountable to the government. But in Britain, it's not like that.
Exactly, because you've learned your lessons. But anyway, the final control is, of course, through the mainstream media.
Yeah.
And one of the things that people, what's happening is that for the first time in history, access to information is available to the ordinary citizen.
Yep.
Power elite always controlled information.
Yeah.
And I want to read you a poem to illustrate my point. This is from 1782, and I want you to think about what's happening in Europe with the French Revolution, with America, the American Revolution. This is a poem by an Englishman, William Cowper, spelled Cowper. The title of the poem is Progress of Error. How shall I speak of thee, or thy power address, thou God of our idolatry, the press? By thee, religion, liberty, and laws exert their influence and advance their cause. By thee, worse plagues than Pharaoh's land befell, diffused, make earth the vestibule of hell. Thou fountain at which drink the good and wise, thou ever-bubbling spring of endless lies, like Eden's dead probationary tree, knowledge of good and evil is from thee. So what's going on now is the final phase of the American Revolution, and that's why Trump, with his tweeting, is bypassing...
Could actually win over millions of dollars from the Hillary campaign.
Yes, exactly. Now, that's also happened in Britain, of course, because the Brexit thing.
Yep.
And the power elite in London wanted to stay in Europe because they were making money off of it and controlling it. But the people outside, the ordinary people outside of London said, no, we want control of our country and our people and our laws back again.
That's why they're so after smearing Jeremy Corbyn, because they know that if he takes over, the globalists will be on the run.
Yep.
And that can't happen. That's why they can't allow them to leave EU either.
Yep.
They will lose control.
So what you're seeing, So this, as I said, this is all part of what's going on. And of course, people are starting to realize a very basic truth, which you can get from statistics, which is called degrees of freedom. And degrees of freedom is that as you get more data, you're limited in what you can do with it. And if you think about, as an individual, you have virtually total control of your freedom, theoretically. But if you join up with somebody else, what you're saying is you're willing to sacrifice a little bit of that freedom in return for other more important rewards.
Yep.
But the minute you start to add 3, 4, 5 people, then you lose your control, you lose your freedom. That's why Trump is going around, for example, what Trump is going to do with the North American Free Trade Agreement is he's going to break it up. He's going to say, I'm going to have a deal with Canada and a deal with Mexico, because as it is now, the two of them can end play me in the middle. That's why he got out of the Trans-Pacific partnership.
Because but I heard he's in new negotiations of a revised version or something. Pretty scary.
Oh,
but we'll see if this comes to fruition.
Yeah, but basically what Trump will do, and that's why saying America first, if he thinks that there's benefit for America, he'll do it. But if he doesn't...
Yeah, but that's superstitious that he actually believes it, and that he is free at liberty to actually implement it. Some think he's under siege, but it's very good signs that he went his own way with North Korea, with Putin. So we'll see. If he has the power to do it, then he ought to do it before his term is up.
Power is one thing. Shakespeare said it's one thing to have power of a giant. It's another thing to use it. And of course, Trump, in my view, well, he is what Thomas Jefferson said, don't ever elect someone that wants to be your president. Trump didn't want to be the president. He didn't want it. He didn't want the job. He talked about it for three previous elections. And he finally realized that the way Obama was taking America was just...
I think he decided for sure at the event of the press club when Obama and the others made fun of him. Because you could see he was pretty sour. So he probably was thinking then, okay, we'll see. We'll see.
Well, I don't disagree with that. But anyway, so that's that.
Court case, Timothy.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, you have to put all of this into the mix of what's going on. And that's why with Trump getting in and pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement has such important implications for the whole climate thing. And by the way, they tried to form a committee through the EPA where they want to have it called the red team and the blue team. And I'm opposed to that. And I said so.
Like Democrats and Republicans?
Like the having the people in favor of human-caused global warming and the ones too opposed to it. No, just study climate change.
Yeah.
You don't need to start creating vision.
No, science is not supposed to be teams. You're supposed to have differences and then work them out.
Exactly. So anyway, just to get back to the trial.
Because this is a part of what we talk about, censorship, right? You can't have free information. I agree with you. Internet has turned upside down. That's why they're trying to quench free information internet. And that's the fact that you and me are talking now is a part of that complete revolution. I agree. Now, the court case is an important part of that because it's censorship.
Yes.
Right? So explain everything to us.
Well, one of the things that the law, of course, is designed to protect people. And one of the contradictions that we've got in our society is that you make rules to make things work. But a group will get together and say, we're going to work to rule. In other words, they're telling you we're going to make it not work. And this is the problem with everything. It's like with nuclear power, there's always two sides to the sword. Right. And by the way, I love to point out to people that the anagram of the word nuclear is unclear. Okay.
And before that.
Yeah. But anyway, So when I got into studying climate, I foolishly thought that, here's a nice quiet area. Yeah. And of course it exploded in my face. But I was as opposed to the global cooling claims when I got in, because I looked at the long-term record and said, no, this is well within natural variability. There's nothing unusual going on here, and it will start to warm. Well, of course, then in 1980, it started to warm, but the difference was then it got grabbed for a political agenda, and I was as opposed to it for the same scientific reasons as I was to the cooling. But now I ran afoul of the political agenda. And I started writing articles and publishing and speaking out, and it drew attention. And there is a lawyer on the west coast of Canada here who has brought lawsuits against many of the so-called global warming skeptics, and I happen to be one of them.
Just like harassment, right?
Yeah, using the law for harassing or silencing people. Because, I mean, just the fact, here, to give you an idea how people reacted, just getting a letter from a lawyer scares people because they know it's going to cost them money to hire a lawyer to defend themselves.
Yeah.
And people think a letter from a lawyer is the law. No, it isn't. It's a letter from a lawyer, nothing else. But I had a solicitor friend, a lawyer friend in England, and he used this. He had a letter which he used to send for people, and the letter said, "Dear sir, such and such has come to our attention, and if you don't deal with it immediately, we will do things that will astonish you." Right?
Yeah, that's the message.
I mean, the veiled threat of that, and yet it's not a threat. But this is how the law has become misused. So anyway, of course, in Canada, this lawyer in British Columbia here said, okay, look, I'll silence the guy. He filed a lawsuit against me. And he filed a lawsuit against me because I wrote an article about the fellow who chaired the founding meeting of the IPCC. And my wife and I sat down and thought about it and said, no, we can't afford a lawyer. We can't afford to defend ourselves. So I withdrew the article. And the lawyer then forced the journal that published my article to write an apology that he had written. Because, see, they don't just sue me. They sue the journal that published or the radio that reported.
Yeah, they want to make you untouchable.
Yes. Anyway, so that first lawsuit disappeared. But within a few months...
And that was used against you. Look,
exactly.
We are winning, they are losing. We are talking the truth. Yeah.
All right. So when we got the second lawsuit, my wife and I sat down and said, we're not going to be bullied anymore. We're going to fight.
Because they didn't have the decency to give up when they were ahead.
No, because
they had to... put that other
but you know why? Because I didn't shut up, Al.
Oh, right.
That's
okay. It didn't work. Yeah.
It didn't work. And my wife and I sat down. Now, sadly, before we got help or realized that we could get help, we'd spend all our savings. But we knew that. We knew what we were getting into. And this is another of the problems. You see, it isn't just the individual. It's the family.
Yeah.
The attacks on the family.
And on top of this, they drive you bankrupt while they smear you of being on the payroll of these powerful.
Yeah, exactly. All the personal attacks and so on. So anyway, I got a PayPal site on my website that helped me with the legal funds. I have so far, it's cost me $600,000 in legal bills to send myself. That's only with the first lawsuit. And now I've got the appeal because I won that first lawsuit because the judge said, no, you are not defamed. And by the way, the guy that brought the lawsuit, all three of them that brought the lawsuit, McBean, Andrew Weaver, and Michael Mann, the hockey stick guy, all three of them are members of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They're all members of the United Nations.
And what was the accusation against you?
Defamation. Did I defame?
Who were you defaming, according to them?
Yeah, because I was saying that what they were saying wasn't true.
Oh, right. So then it's personal.
Yeah.
It's not about the data. It's about you're insulting us and shaming us.
Yeah.
Crazy. And they are scientists. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
So the judge agreed with you?
The judge ruled. In fact, he didn't even make a ruling. He just said, I dismissed the case.
Oh, he just dismissed. So the first case went away, but still 600,000.
600,000. Now I've got to fight the appeal, and that's going to cost me more money. And I've got the second case, Michael Mann case, to deal with, and we're trying to get that into court now.
Could you tell us about that case?
Yes. Well, what's going on there? Michael Mann, of course, as you know, did the trick of rewriting history. See, they had this problem, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. My friend Hubert Lamb had produced a graph that showed that there was a very warm period around 1,000 years ago when the Vikings were sailing in Greenland, as you mentioned. And by the way, they were sailing in Arctic waters in northern Canada that are now permanent pack ice.
Newfoundland.
And there are Viking settlements in northern Quebec that very few people know about. They know about the ones in Newfoundland.
Right.
But anyway, anyway, this graph that Lamb produced showed this warm period when it was 2 degrees Celsius warmer, at least, than it is today. And it showed a very cold period around 1680. And
that's when they disappeared from Greenland.
Yes.
It became too cold. It was a mini ice age.
Exactly. Yeah. And there was the bishop from Iceland tried to get there because he said no bishop's been to Greenland for 50 years. He finally got there and found the colony had virtually collapsed.
Abandoned, yeah. So there's always been high speculation. In Bergen, in my hometown, they were sitting in the 1600s discussing in the pubs what happened to our brethren on Iceland.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, this graph was a problem for them because they were going around saying it's warmer now than it's ever been. But here was this graph that showed that it wasn't. So, and you can check with this person as well, Professor David Deming, Deming. And he gave this evidence in testimony to a congressional hearing. So it's been given under oath. But he wrote an article in Science, which was sort of basically supporting or appeared to support the anthropogenic global warming issue. And he got an email from one of the people that was supporting that. And let me see if I can pull this up just a minute. I'll try and get this for you as quickly as I can.
Okay, let me correct something I just said while you're doing that. I said they were discussing what happened with the people in Iceland. I meant Greenland, of course.
Yes.
In Iceland has always been settlement. Yeah.
Well, yes, but even there was a big out-migration out of Iceland.
Yeah, it was hard. Yeah, it was very hard. They were starving. They had to get help from here.
Okay, so here's what the email that Professor Deming got. Then he gave this as evidence, as I said, to the congressional hearing. Yep. He said, Professor Deming revealed the evidence in the following letter to Science. With the publication of the article in Science, that's his publication, in 1995, I gained significant credibility in the community of scientists working on climate change. They thought I was one of them, someone who would pervert science in the surface of social and political causes. So one of them let his guard down. A major person working in the area of climate change and global warming sent me an astonishing email that said, we have to get rid of the medieval warm period. Now, that was from somebody...
That's directly falsifying data. That's more than just misrepresenting it.
Oh, totally rewriting the climate history. And that's what the hockey stick did.
This is what the Nazis did.
Yeah.
Change history. Yeah. According to an agenda.
Yeah.
Soviets did it too.
Yeah, and of course they do that, rewrite history. In fact, we talked about Patrick Moore with the Greenpeace thing earlier and the Marxist takeover. Yeah. I about a month ago, I said, Patrick, we've got proof now that it was Marxist. And he said, why? I said, because they've rewritten you out of the history. You're not in Greenpeace's history anymore. Right. You don't exist. Yeah. But anyway, so this whole idea of rewriting history and the hockey stick. So I gave a presentation in Winnipeg, Canada, a slide presentation or PowerPoint to the public, talking about climate change, showed what had happened with the hockey stick. And in an interview afterwards, the person interviewing me said, well, what do you think about Michael Mann? And if you found out already, I liked a sense of humor, I think, is absolutely critical to the human condition. Oh, yeah.
Let me just say, I think it was Walpole who said it. Yeah. The world is a tragedy to those who feel and a comedy to those who think.
Exactly. And what you see is they have no sense of humor at all. Anyway, what happened was that in the interview afterwards, the interviewer said to me, well, what do you think about Michael Mann? And I flippantly said, well, he's at Penn State, but maybe he should be at State Penn. And within 12 hours, I got another lawsuit. And that was
for insulting him?
Oh, sorry?
For insulting him, right?
Yeah, defamation.
Defamation. But you're a satiricist, right?
Oh,
that's your work to say stuff like that.
Well, I think that satire is the best form of deflating things.
Right.
I think it's a superb form of humor.
I mean, it was an innocent sentence. Everybody understands that was humor.
Sure. But
it was a wordplay, goddammit.
Yes. And what happened was that the lawsuit was filed in British Columbia courts by an American from Pennsylvania for an event that occurred in Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Jesus.
And this is another thing that goes on. It's called jurisdictional shopping. You go around till you find a jurisdiction that will bring in the verdict that you want.
Right.
And again, it's a complete misuse of the law, but that's what's happening. So anyway, Michael Mann brought his lawsuit. We were already fighting these lawsuits, and of course the Michael Mann one was part of them. I was scheduled to go for trial on January the 20th of 2017. About a month before the trial, and by now the case had been dragging on for 6 years, but a month before the trial.
And cost you dearly, right?
Yeah.
Drain your resources.
Yeah, and by the time that, about a month before the trial, Mann and his lawyer asked for an adjournment.
Okay.
And of course I said, well, why do they need an adjournment? They've had 6 years to prepare.
That's so suspicious.
Yes. Well, the problem is that in Canada, the courts always grant an adjournment before the trial begins with the reasonable assumption that if you can settle the case out of court, you can save a whole lot of court time and money.
Yep.
So we really had no choice but to accept the adjournment.
Mm-hmm.
We did it on the condition that he produced the documents that we were looking for, which was the computer code which he used to create the hockey stick, and all the data, because he provided...
so in a way you were just asking for evidence, right?
Yes.
And that's your right.
Well, it's not just my right, it's the right of all science. Because you see, one of the most important tests in science is what is called reproducible result.
Yeah, sure. But now it's not science, now it's law.
Yes.
And it was your right in the case to demand it, right?
Okay, but what had happened in the meantime? Michael Mann had another case brought against him by Ken Cuccinelli, who was the Attorney General of the state of Virginia. Mm-hmm. And the state of Virginia sued Michael Mann at Penn State and said, look, you've produced data using the taxpayers' money that has been used as the basis for policy that is causing the world unnecessarily trillions of dollars. We think you should therefore produce the data of how you did that.
Right.
Mann went to court, and the court ruled he didn't have to produce it because it was his intellectual property.
Oh my God. So trillions of dollars are going into the pockets of someone.
Yep.
And it's a waste.
Yep. And it's a waste.
And he can get away with the reasons for it.
Yep.
Is my possession, my personal possession. That sounds like a corrupt court decision.
Well, of course. But you see, now what he's doing is, and I don't know this for certain, but it's almost certain, almost sure, that he's going to argue in the Canadian court that this American court ruling that it's his intellectual property, so he doesn't have to give it up. That's what he'll use. And of course, then, as you say, it's a legal issue at that point, because we'll come back and say, well, look, we need those documents to prove that we didn't defame you. So how can you bring a lawsuit?
Has there been any decision here?
Sorry?
Has there been any decision about this?
No, as I said, because he adjourned the case. And we're now trying to get it back into court. Oh. But here's the other problem in Canada. You can bring a lawsuit against somebody and then just decide to drop it. And the only thing the person can do is sue you for costs.
Right.
But that's another huge legal cost.
Yeah.
And even if you win the case, how do you get the money?
Well, I'm sure he has resources.
But even if he had resources, what are you going to spend the next 20 years trying to get it?
But have you gotten help from somewhere?
I got help from the public after I put the PayPal site.
So you had to rely on crowdfunding?
Yeah, no, I didn't go to crowdfunding because that wasn't available at the time. The crowdfunding and GoToMe fund, just donations. And here's
you still need it, by the way?
Sorry?
Do you still need it?
Well, no, and I'll explain why in a minute. But
okay.
One of the things that it pleased me about the monies, which gave me hope about the humans, because you start to,
Yeah, of course.
So, yes. but I got money from a lot of people who said, look, we don't totally agree with you, but you got the right to say it.
Right.
They recognized it was
Voltaire, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I will fight against what you're saying, but I will also fight to death for your right to say it.
Yeah, but in the context of what we're talking about, Voltaire never said that.
Who was it?
Do you know where that came?
No.
Well, where it came from, I've forgotten the name of the woman, but the woman wrote for Reader's Digest. Mm-hmm. And of course, they do these little synopsis stories of things in history.
They start memes, yes, in the old days, yes.
And so she was asked to summarize Voltaire's ideas. She's the one that said, that right. Phrase. Yeah. Now, it does represent what Voltaire thought, but he never actually said it.
Ah, I see. Okay, so the quote itself is kind of a rephrasing of...
Well, and this is the same thing. I mean, you see quotes everywhere. Oh, it's attributed to Churchill or to...
always Churchill or Jefferson.
Jefferson or Mark Twain. Mark Twain.
Those three guys have probably been 50% of those quotes.
Yeah. Anyway.
So you got help from the public.
Yeah. Now back to the funding. And I don't think, it's already out there, but the money I got from the public didn't even come close. I mean, it helped a lot. Oh. I believe the total amount I got was about $200,000. But when you're looking at, just going to court was $400,000. But anyway, one day my lawyer got a call from a gentleman who was very concerned about what was going on. He is an expert in computer modeling, so he knew exactly what was going on. Mm. And he said, Michael Mann's, the only thing he ever said to me was that personally was Michael Mann's a charlatan and he's got to be exposed. Mm. And I said, look, I don't want to deal with any of the money. The PayPal money, for example, goes directly through to my lawyer. It doesn't go to me at all. And I said, I prefer you deal directly with my lawyer. So he did that. And he has so far funded me to the tune of $1.1 million.
So this is a classical wealthy philanthropist then?
Yes. He made his money in hedge funds.
Okay, so you even know about his, okay. Mm.
Yeah, and we've never attempted to hide it. There's no attempt.
And he's not an oil guy then, if it's in hedge funds?
No, he's a hedge fund guy, and as I said, he's a computer guy. He's actually retired now, and I know he's worth it.
No, but this is nice. This is excellent. It's their right to donate as much as it's the poor man's right. So that has kind of saved you with the costs then.
Yeah, but that's another part of the issue we talked about earlier. Why is money from one source directed and problematic, whereas money from government or from Greenpeace or from anybody else not directed?
Money is money, especially if it's tied up to intentions.
But here's the key thing, and the way I deal with this with the public is to say, it doesn't matter who funds you. If your science doesn't hold up to investigation, it doesn't matter where the money came from.
No. That's like science used to be, right?
Yeah.
Or the ideal of it, at least.
Yeah, the idea of it, yes. Yeah.
But they have people who are financing them too, don't they? Mon and those guys.
Oh, yes.
They can afford, because otherwise, in a system like this, the more money you have, the easier it is to be right, because you can always force your will.
Yes.
But are these guys feeling the costs too, or?
Well, it's like with the guy that funded me. $1.1 million sounds like a lot, but let me put it in this context. I remember the year that there was a big shout in the media, oh, what a great guy Bill Gates is. He gave $38 million to the university that he never even graduated from. Mm. And then I looked it up and I discovered that Bill Gates made $38 million in 12 minutes.
Yeah, everything is relative.
Right. Yeah. So suddenly you get a perspective. Yep. Because our minds can't get around a million, let alone a billion.
No, but I think it's nice that that happened, because now we can.
Oh, I agree.
We can get a fairer. Yeah. And what's the status now of all these 3 court cases?
Well,
the first is dismissed, that we know.
Well, here's the issue. I'm dealing with the appeal because Andrew Weaver, who brought that case, was a professor at the University of Victoria. He was the computer modeler expert on 4 of the IPCC reports, the 1995, the 2001, 2007, and 2013 reports. He quit the university and ran for politics, and he is now the leader of the Green Party in British Columbia. And of course, our argument in the courts was it's the misuse of science for a political agenda that's really what the issue is about. And to give you an idea of what you're confronting is that in the court case, and this was already in the public record, but in a different context, we showed photographs of Weaver standing in front of a wall in his office, covered with clippings and photographs, and it's labeled the Wall of Hate. And the wall he put up all of the things that were said about him because he was trying to save the planet. And he wanted to
sounds like a psychopath.
Yeah. Oh, I get another lawsuit. Anyway.
Well, I'm just saying it sounds like one. You can say yes to that.
Well, exactly. Yes. So this is, I mean, who has a wall of hate on their office,
right,
no matter what going?
You're pretty obsessed, huh?
Yeah. But anyway, so I've got to deal with that case. And then the Michael Mann case, we hope to get into the court before the summer is out. If he withdraws, I've already got agreement from the funders that we will start a massive international PR campaign to expose what he did and how he did it.
Good. So he can't withdraw. The only other option then is to deliver, but he can't do that either, can he?
No.
Then he's screwed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then he's screwed either way.
Yes.
He should actually withdraw. That would be the best bet for him because he can always try to talk back.
Well, of course, this is the point. They get to the point where they have to make decisions, which is the biggest crime or biggest sin to be labeled with.
Exactly. He's between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah. Well, that was the story with it when I mentioned the Senator Worth story. He had to decide, is the damage done by that original story more problem
or the cover-up
or the cover-up? Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I do wish you well with the whole thing. Whenever, I mean, this is dragging out, but meanwhile, you're not silenced, right? So you're talking like you do today, and you're writing books. Let's end it with you presenting your bibliography here.
Fine.
What books should people get from you? I guess your popular books.
Well, I've got 2 about the climate issue. I've written textbooks on climate as well. But
Thomas showed me your books, but I can't remember the titles.
The first one I wrote I didn't write for a long time because I knew the public didn't understand the issue. But when I wrote it, I knew that immediately the academics would find one little fault and throw the whole thing out.
Yeah. The fallacy of the footnote. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So that one has got footnotes, citations, references, everything else. And it's called The Deliberate Corruption of Climate Science. Now, hang on a second. Where's the other one?
And the critics loves your books.
Well, apparently they do, yes. But this is a measure of the difficulty because, like, a lawyer read that book I just mentioned to you, and he said it was a very, very good book, but it was a hard slog. And this is a guy that had some ideas about what was going on. So what I did was I brought out a second book called Human-Caused Global Warming, The Biggest Deception in History.
That's the dumbed-down version then.
Yes, and it doesn't have the footnotes and the citations and so on because it was deliberately designed as a piece of investigative journalism because the subtitle for it is The Why, What, Where, When, and How It Was Achieved. So it was done as investigative journalism so people could pick it up and just get a general overview of what was done, why it was done, and how it was done. And that's the book that I recommend for most people.
Okay. We're gonna give also the website addresses people can find your stuff on.
All right.
Anything you want to add before we end this? Do you think we covered most fields?
I think I really appreciate the amount of time, and I think we got a pretty good sense of what went on and how it was done and so on. But here's the thing that bothers me at the end of all of this. Mm-hmm. I do a lot of Skype interviews with school children doing projects on global warming because I'm the sort of go-to skeptic who will answer all their questions.
Yeah, when they're they get the task of getting the other side, then they come to you. Yeah,
yeah, and I'm also willing to help them because I'm so committed to education.
That's nice.
But anyway, I did a group out of Colorado last summer, and at the end of it, one of them said, "Would you do it again?" Hmm. Would you do what you did again? And I mean, that was like a bullet between my eyes. And I said, I've never thought about it. And I said, give me a minute. And my answer was, look, I'm in what I'm in now, and I'll see it through to the end because I do not believe you should start things and not finish them. And if you're not going to finish, don't start. You're better off. But anyway, I said, the answer to your actual question is no, I probably wouldn't do it again, knowing what it's cost me and what it's cost my family. And I said, we've all discussed it. Nobody's complaining, my children and my wife, because we knew what we were getting into. But I could have, I'm not stupid. I could have made a whole pile of money. I could have made a lot of money. But, things are more important than money.
And this isn't exceptional for you, right? It's been high costs all over the place for many soothsayers.
But it's high cost for anybody that questions anything to science. That's the problem. Yeah. That's why I'm making these comments. What I'm saying is, look, be prepared, but don't let that deter you.
Yeah. It applies all over the board. You're right.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
In today's society, you can go against the power without being marked, at least.
And know exactly what you're doing and what you're getting into, and be very, very careful of those that say they support you. Let me put it in terms that I've come to understand. It's better the bigot in front of me than the liberal behind me. Because I know where the bigot's coming from. I can deal with that. Yeah. But the liberals behind me patting my back, and he's got a knife up his sleeve.
Yeah, corporate Democrats. They work for the man, but they pretend you're your friend.
Exactly.
And we all know the costs. Look at Assange. Look at Snowden.
Yep.
But I hope, it's a slow oil tanker to turn around. So I hope that we gave you a mic today can contribute to help this. And we encourage everyone to not just buy your books, but also look up the sources, look up the facts, look up what's been claimed and see for yourself. Yeah. That's the best way to get a paradigm expansion, is to actually not just listen to opinions, but also fact check them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And kudos to you for, riding off the storm and fulfilling what you started out.
Thank you.
At least posterity will thank you, if nothing else.
Okay. Yeah. Posthumous after the fact. Yeah.
But all real educators are good with that. I know.
Yeah. Anyway, Al, I thank you for allowing this wide-ranging discussion, but for me, so much of it is about the context of this event. In and of itself, it's problematic and worthy, but it needs the context as we were able to discuss today. And I think that's what the value of your program is. You say, okay, well, here's this issue, and let me dig into it and let's find out the truth. By the way, the documentary I made with Martin Durkin, The Great Global Warming Swindle, that's how he makes his documentaries. He looks at an issue and he says, okay, here's what is out in the media and the public, but what's the other side of the story?
Right.
And of course, there's never
just follow the data, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because I'm more in favor of that than following sides. Yeah. Tomorrow I won't have on like a propagator for that.
No.
Because it's the same with the media. Media is supposed to be objective, but not neutral. And the difference there is that, and the same with politicians, the difference there is that being neutral means that, like say a ball game, who won? I don't know.
Yeah.
Could be this guy, could be that guy. I'm neutral, right? No.
Yeah.
Objective means that you're going to report the facts no matter where they lead you, even if they hurt your own pet causes.
Exactly.
That's being objective. That's what journalists used to be about.
Yeah.
Nothing like that anymore.
By the way, one thing I'm very proud of was that, 2 years ago now, maybe even 3, a fellow contacted me from Romania. And he'd come across something
I
I'd
read
written.
about that. Yes.
Yeah.
Tell us.
And so we ended up doing 7 one-hour Skype programs, and he's put it out all through.
And he's reaching out, right?
Oh, yeah. And it's being picked up in a lot of the old Soviet satellite nations, because what happened there, and we laughed about this, the guy and I said the communist leaders became Democrats overnight and continued in power. And he said, well, that was the problem. He said, we were getting only what they were telling us, and it was all the United Nations story. So that's why.
Well, it's still bureaucracy. That's what you get.
Yeah.
It's the rule by the administrators.
Yeah.
And it's killing the world, either state or corporate. It's the same beast.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Al. I appreciate this opportunity.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Al. And I'm ready to answer any questions anytime, as you can tell.
Cool. Or we may have you back. No problem.
Okay.
We're going to have Corbyn before that.
Yeah. Okay. And we'll say hello to Piers for me.
Yep. We'll do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
No problem.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And that's the show for today. As a postscript, I'd like to add a few comments. First of all, remember that if you've been listening to this and you are very skeptical to the assertions that Dr. Ball has been making, because maybe you were like me, I used to think this isn't even a dispute. Because I've been aware of climate change for a very long time. I was pretty young when it dawned upon me. That's what's going on. But, of course, nobody is disputing climate change. That's a smear argument done by the proponents. The real question is whether it's anthropogenic, that is, if it's us human beings who are the main cause. And I was convinced of that, but, of course, like most of you listening to this, I have no idea. I'm not a climate scientist. I haven't been working with the data. I hadn't even looked into it and tried to determine what's going on as far as those who's working with that research goes. Now I have, and after being looking into it, it seems more likely to me that it is the skeptics in this case who are correct, that it is larger causations in play than us little ants on the globe. But of course, again, you cannot afford to be emotional and extremistic about this. If you reject this out of hand, if you dismiss this, then you have been buying into ideology. And it's not truth and facts you're concerned about, it's emotions and identification. And fine, do that if that's what you prefer, but then you're not a part of this conversation, because we are appealing to thinking people, truth-seeking people, fact-based people, not based upon authorities. Oh, it goes against what the church says, so burn the heretic, right? That's most people's, and people can't fathom. They're thinking, no, this has to be cooks, or everybody says it is, all scientists says it is, the whole system, the state, even corporations, even oil companies, they're paying for CO2 fees, and it's a part of the big political global game. So this can't be real, right? That's how people think. But again, that's emotionally based. And are you really believing that society has never been wrong about anything? Even the global society, it happens all the time. We develop all the time. We revise all the time. If you lived in the 30s in Germany, it would be commonplace to think that Jews are subhuman, for example. And if you don't agree with that today, then you admit that a whole country or a whole range of countries, states can be wrong. It's ideology. And in this case, we have to look at who's actually working with this, and we have to look at what their arguments are and what the facts they're basing those arguments are. And the first thing you'll notice, it's not a consensus. First of all, it doesn't matter if a psychology professor is in favor or critical to climate change, because he's not researching this. So it's not even about what academics believe. It's not about what the state, the nation believes. It's not what the private companies believes. It's certainly not what politicians believe, and they're deciding the policies, right? So we live in a society where CO2 belief is official policy. Well, it has nothing to do with facts. It's just a policy decided by politicians for whatever reasons. Sometimes those reasons are good, sometimes not so good, even corrupt. But we have to look at who is actually working in the field or are competent in the field, and there's no consensus there. In fact, it looks like there's still a majority being skeptical, although they don't have an outlet or a voice or paid, and it's just a matter of time before they will be wiped out by the gradual, people retiring, new people coming in, and who's controlling the recruitment of the new ones. That's the proponents. So it may happen that at some point, who knows how many years, it's going to be a consensus or a majority who is for CO2 belief. But again, then it's based upon the system. It's like the Christian church was very diverse in the beginning, and at some point they cleaned up and they purged. It can happen with anything. It can happen with a sports team, and it can happen in academia and in science, and when that happens, by true science. So let's hope at least that even if many believers are entering the field, I mean, young people, they are grown up with this, right? And you can't really blame them for believing what they're told. But you can blame them if they look into the facts and they're either too stupid or incompetent to verify the facts, or they don't dare speak out. Though most of us probably in their shoes would do the same, because who is really willing to make problems in their own life because of truth? Unfortunately, not too many. And most people who work in the field have it as a career. It's not as if it's a philosophical truth exploration that's driving them. So it's a complex matter. If you really want to know the facts, you have to look into it yourself, and you have to listen to arguments from all sides. But we are not going to cover all sides, because the proponents have 99% of the media already. We're going to give voice to the few critics, some of them. And then you have better sources to make a better, more accurate judgment call about this matter. Now, for me, it's pretty simple. Mankind are still very insignificant in this huge cosmos. And first of all, believing that we can alter the globe that easily, it's a fishy point. And second, that we have the competence to know the incredibly complex ecosystem is tantamount to megalomania. But that's how modern society works. We think we know everything. We screw up our food supplies with GMO and whatnot. And geoengineer, we alter the weather, everything and anything, with this arrogant, fanatical, naive belief that, oh yeah, we know everything today. That's what they've been thinking all the time. They thought it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 80 years ago. And this arrogance, I mean, you only need to know basic history to know that, oh, we've never known what's going on. The next generations will always correct us. And still, I'm not even protesting that belief as much as I'm protesting that we act upon it. That's the real madness. There will always be megalomaniacs and fanatics, but organizing society based upon such a fallacy, No, there has to be deeper stuff going on, and if we admit that some of these proponents are corrupt and are liars, fakers, although of course the majority are just naive, believe in good faith that this is the case. But if we admit that because it's not just a mistake, it comes from somewhere, and you can't excuse some of the proponents if indeed the anthropogenic lead is wrong. And then we have to look for other motives, and there's many. That also explains why are the oligarchs and the energy companies on board with this. Well, like Dr. Ball touched upon, it's a great tool to get to implement several agendas that has nothing to do with climate. For example, globalism. It's a good facilitator for that, and also control, which is where it's going in all directions anyway, in media, in terms of who's controlling the states. For the most part, not the people anymore, but the huge multinational corporations and the globalist oligarchs. So this is a good tool, and it's a good tool to scam more money. Anything that can be taxed, anything that they can bog us down with more fees and costs, perfect. So it's not a moral, ethical issue, like who cares for the environment or not, because the same people who are in favor of this doesn't give a toss on other areas when it comes to poison or climate or environmental protection. So, no, it's a complex matter, and I hope you understand then that you can be completely rational and sober and be critical to the anthropogenic lead. In fact, it seems to me that the anthropogenic approach is based upon ideology, whereas those who are really truth seekers are careful about making blank statements and are looking into other causations. And the sun is probably the biggest culprit here. And you don't even need really the data to understand that, because all over the world since the dawn of mankind, the sun has been worshipped as a god, and by advanced cultures and civilization. Why? Because they knew if there's anything that is powerful enough to influence the globe, it is our Father who art in heaven. And our Mother Earth is on so many areas directly tied to the sun. So, believing that we can take the place of the sun, that's pretty megalomaniac. I guess there are hypothetics where we could ruin the globe, but it's not really the globe we would be killing. It would be life, or at least human life on the globe. I believe we have the power to suicide ourselves. But you can blow all the atom bombs in the world and the globe would still be there, although we wouldn't. So that's that. Now, I just also want to say, I, of course, try to fact check as much as possible some of the more, should I say, paradigm-challenging claims that Dr. Ball did. And to my amazement, they checked out. Because I was a bit skeptical to some of it. For example, the DDT thing. But man, that's interesting to look into. Seems that it's, like he made a point about, like Paracelsus said, anything can be medicinal, anything can be poisonous. The dosage is essential. And when it comes to DDT, it seems that coffee is as poisonous as DDT. And that there were really political reasons and other ulterior motives that was in play when that was banned. And some countries, like he said, in Africa is still using it because we killed malaria in the West with the help of DDT. But in third world countries, they have millions of people dying from malaria because they can't use DDT. That's why some of them say, screw it, we're going to do the same as you did. And it seems it's working well. And it's not even, it's the chemical companies there. No, DDT isn't a big profit for the multinational corporations. That's probably why it's banned. It's not even manufactured by the globalist companies anymore. Basically India and China who's producing today's DDT. And it's not patented anymore, so they can't make as much money on it. So again, we see a complete politicization of issues that we believe in our mind has to do with health or science, and there's other reasons behind. This is the complexity of the world we're living in now. So we have to be vigilant, we have to be critical, and we can't be lazy. We have to investigate. Am I saying that there's no chemical pollutions on crops and food? No, of course not. No, I'm green to the bone. The only reason I'm not slaughtering the DDT anymore is because I've looked into it and things are not black and white. Sometimes there will be good causes on one side, other times on another side. We have to afford having two thoughts in the head at the same time without going into cognitive dissonance. So, the only weakness in Ball's account today that I could find was when I confronted him with the cows, aren't they alleged to contribute to the CO2 pollution? He said it was only about methane, if I understood him correctly. But I checked it, and it's actually There is this claim that they are contributing also to the CO2 pollution. And of course, I'm not saying that's true. And even if it was true, I'm not saying it's a problem because, again, we don't know to what extent CO2 actually is a problem. It may actually be a good thing for nature. It's food for the trees, right? So it's not about that, but it's a general allegation from the CO2 proponents that the factory farming of cows are contributing to the CO2 amount. So either he misunderstood me or he's not updated on that claim, and I can't blame him because he doesn't believe it is a problem. So why would he care about all the different arguments they're coming up with of what produces it? But it's unfair to make any guess or statement about his view on this because he's not here to offer it. But at least I've redempted my own suggestion about it. It was correctly remembered by me that it is supposed to be a CO2 contribution. So that's it. Other than that, his stuff checks out as far as I can tell. Now you go and you do your research and see if you agree. Of course, if you don't care, if you don't have time, well, then no problem. I mean, we can't all be scientists or researchers or detectives, but then we at least must make sure we're not having strong opinions. Because you can't have strong opinions about stuff you don't know. Of course, you can, but then you're a moron and not a truth seeker. So I advise humility on these matters. And I'm trying to adopt that myself according to how much I can afford being sure. And we can never be 100% sure about these matters. Okay, we come to the end of today's controversial show. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you appreciate that we're not just exploring philosophical stuff or mysteries or fancy stuff, but that we also, because you know what they say, reality is more incredible than fiction. And if we're living in a reality where illusions and lies are strong driving forces, first of all, it's incredible just to unveil it. Second of all, we're obliged to try to do something about it in order to get a better world. So I owe it to you, I owe it to the world to cover socio-political matters, and though it will never be a hit in terms of numbers of audience, that's a cost we have to be willing to bear. So thank you again for supporting us, for listening to the show, and hopefully you will spread this, share it with folks, and contribute to the general education and heightening of the standard of the current debate, because it's so important with different voices, a variation of angles and approaches. This uniformitarianism, this black and white trend that's ruling today's media and even education is really a detriment. Complete breakdown of our civilization, bankruptcy of our intellectuality, of our ability to function as a healthy society. We're in a collective psychosis on so many areas. So again, we have to be libertarian when it comes to the range of voices to debates. We can't be fanatical and we can't be suppressive of any. Because at the end of the day, if something is wrong, not factual, if something is an illusion and untrue, why are we afraid of it? Truth will always outplay untruths if both get equal field play. So those who fear that must have an agenda. It's only really if you want to maintain illusions that you're going to try to ban any threat, any opposition to it. And it's not scientific. The scientific approach is thesis meeting antithesis, leading to synthesis and bringing us to a higher and more accurate position. Anything else is a fishy agenda. And we can only hope that the majority of human beings are interested in truth. Of course, it's not as popular as you would think, although, of course, it's celebrated in empty speech. But that's another matter. That concludes today's program. Your host, as ever, has been Thanks to your support and my team, I remain yours sincerely. Be seeing you.
Who is number one?